All right, now for a long one, kind of.
Yep. Article 1, Section 8. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, but all imposts or all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States.
All right.
Congress controls the money. This goes back to parliamentary procedure. Parliament controls the money to keep it from being in the hands of any one person, mostly.
Yeah, in the Parliament, if the king wanted to raise money for war or taxes, he'd be like, "Hey, Parliament, do this for me."
Yeah, that was, I think, part of why Charles the First ended up finally calling a parliament, because he wanted to go to war and he couldn't do it on his own, and then that ended poorly for him.
Yeah, and
But it is the same in the United States, where Parliament, Congress in our case, controls the purse strings. They pay the debts.
Yeah, but unlike back then, at least until they overthrew that thing, the president can't dismiss Congress like for a while. The king could dismiss Parliament.
Technically, I think the king can still dismiss Parliament. It's just that he doesn't. But I don't know, because I'm not an expert in UK law. I'm not even an expert in American law.
Well, I think
standard. I am not a lawyer. Caveat here.
Yeah,
I am certainly not a barrister.
Yeah, I've been watching videos about the English monarchy lately, and I think it wasn't until like either Edward your favorite people, the Edward the Seventh or George the Fifth, that Parliament actually elected their own prime minister. Before then, the king still appointed the prime minister.
Yeah, and I think this was even in the days before the term prime minister existed, because that is a relatively modern role. If there were a prime minister in those days, I think our government might look different. I think there would be a prime minister job in Congress, and there kind of is, but there really isn't. Speaker of the House is as close as we get, and it's not the same thing at all. But this is Congress. A lot of what Congress does falls under provide for the common defense and general welfare. Any disbursement of money from Congress falls into one of those two categories. Franklin Roosevelt relied a lot on the general welfare bit during the New Deal. The New Deal and the Great Society and things like that, the Affordable Care Act, are all specifically general welfare of the United States. It is better for the country if we don't have poor people starving to death and dying of disease in the streets. That's what those laws are basically in place to say. As a poor person, thank you.
Ugh.
Yeah. It also is very clear that you can't penalize one state because you don't like it. It doesn't matter if California didn't vote for you. Taxes can't be higher in California than they are in Alabama.
At least federal taxes.
At least federal taxes. State taxes are a whole other thing, and I have a very different rant on that particular subject. But federal taxes are uniform throughout the United States. Now, they are not paid uniformly, in as much as not every state has the same financial weight. California pays a heck of a lot more in taxes en masse than Alabama does, and not just because their population is so much higher, but because of what they produce and what gets taxed and who lives there.
Yeah. taxes. I was one time I went to another state and bought something, and they're like, and it was actually the price that it is, but they didn't have sales tax in that state. I'm like,
Yeah. No, that's we go to visit my mother in Oregon a couple of times a year, and we always go to IKEA when we're there, not just because the IKEA in Portland is like 2 miles from my mom's house, and that's so much more convenient than taking a specific trip just to go to the one closer to Seattle, but it's also because there is no sales tax in Oregon. Oregon is all state income tax. So we go to IKEA in Oregon because it works out cheaper. When I was in college, my roommate was an Oregon resident and was able to buy things with her Oregon ID and not have to pay sales tax because of a deal Washington and Oregon. I don't understand it. But she bought my TV for me when we were in college because it was cheaper because she didn't have to pay sales tax.
Okay, real fast here. I thought at this time, the Congress there was no federal taxes. So what was it? Were the taxes?
Well, there wasn't, but they were laying the groundwork in case one was imposed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Flying ahead.
Yeah. There was briefly an income tax during the Civil War, and then there was some argument about whether it was constitutional or not, and now there's an amendment that says we have an income tax. I don't know if I said sales tax, I meant income tax. There was an income tax during the Civil War because wars are expensive, and, half the country was cut off and what have you. But on a federal level, permanently, income tax is a 20th century development. But taxes can include tariffs. Taxes can include, duties is another one they have in here, like liquor duties and things like that. All of these are covered. They are collected and imposed by Congress, and they are uniform through the states, and the money goes to pay the debts of the government, which was a huge issue to that generation. The United States owed a ton from the Revolutionary War, and under the Articles of Confederation could not pay it. So that's part of where this comes from.
So are imposts the same thing as imports?
Imposts is, I believe, tariffs.
So basically imports.
Yeah, it's taxes on imports, I believe. I'd have to look it up, but because I am also not an economist, I am not an accountant. So, I'm an amateur historian, kids. I don't necessarily have all of the background for all of these things.
And I'm guessing here, exercises is exports, maybe?
Excises. It's another kind of tax.
Okay.
Yeah. That one I know, but I can't remember what that one is. So we'll move on to our next slide here. To borrow money on the credit of the United States. It's in the Constitution that we can have a national debt. I don't know if you remember, but a while back there was a lot of talk about the credit rating of the United States. Treasury bills and things like that are based on the credit rating of the United States, and they are a better investment because the credit rating is high. And screwing with that screws with a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, I think it's only been. I think I may be wrong, but I think was it Clinton? I think Clinton was the only president we didn't have a deficit under.
Yeah, and having a deficit as a country is very different than having a deficit as an individual. And I, for one, do not actually mind our country running on a deficit, provided everything keeps working the way we want it to. Because the deficit includes things like people who have treasury bills. That counts as a deficit for the United States, but it is an investment for a lot of ordinary people.
Well, I guess working with a deficit is something our future president is apparently good at.
He has most of his life, but he's a successful businessman.
But unfortunately, unlike him, America can't declare bankruptcy. At least I don't think they can.
No. If a country could declare bankruptcy, a lot of international politics would look very, very different than it does. Part of the problem between World War I and World War II would have been solved if Germany could have just declared bankruptcy.
Like, sorry, France. Yeah, we're not paying you back. Like, bankruptcy.
Yeah. Hyperinflation in Germany was astonishing in those years. And there are countries today that have that. Zimbabwe, I think, has had to reset their currency several times because the notes were just getting so ridiculously high. You get $100 trillion bills, and they could barely pay for anything.
Yeah, what was the saying? A wheelbarrow full of cash could barely buy a loaf of bread.
Yeah. So the credit union of the United States matters. The deficit is actually important and valuable.
And this is all the legislators.
It's all in the legislature, and it's all in the Constitution. To regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. So the first thing I'm going to get to here is that Native Americans were actually considered separate nations from this point. And the status there, again, is one that I am not educated enough to know what I'm talking about. I know some, but I also know it is a very complicated subject that deserves its own study from someone who knows a lot more than I do. But this is where treaties come from. Treaties have the authority of Congress with Native Americans. Congress controls interstate commerce. The fact that you can buy products from a major American retailer founded and based in Washington State, for example, and know that your purchase is going to be completely regulated and they can't pull shenanigans on you at the last minute and have no recourse because you live most of the way across the country, that's part of the Constitution, the regulation of commerce. And the same thing with buying things from, let's say, China. That's regulated by Congress. Now, I looked it up, and in practice, Congress did pass a law last century giving the president the authority of tariff. Certain senators would like that back now, please, and they are mostly Republicans, I'm going to say. But technically, Congress has given away its authority. I would argue they kind of constitutionally can't do that, but they did.
Like, the president can make tariffs now. Oh crap, he actually is doing that.
Presidents have made tariffs a handful of times over the last century or so. Franklin Roosevelt established some in the Depression and World War II. I believe Kennedy did. I think Biden actually did for something that was considered to be of national defense. No president has ever established sweeping tariffs because tariffs are actually a really bad idea in a lot of ways. But what do? Vote for someone else like I did. Yeah.
But also, sorry, we'll go back. So I said, other countries, state to state, and then the tribes.
Yes. Yeah. Which basically covers it. All it's missing there is Congress can't tell you as an individual how to sell to another individual, which, yeah, they can. We'll get to it later. To establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States. Congress sets who becomes a U.S. citizen and how you declare bankruptcy. And the bankruptcy system is currently broken. As anybody who's contemplated bankruptcy over student loans will be the first to tell you. Because bankruptcy doesn't clear student loans. And our naturalization law has changed several times in U.S. history. We basically didn't have naturalization laws. Well, we didn't have immigration laws in those days.
Yeah.
And part of that is they would have been just impossible to enforce.
Yeah, that was, I think that was officially established, what, the 14th Amendment?
Well, immigration laws themselves were not established until, gosh, like the 1880s, I want to say.
Well, I meant the naturalization part.
Oh, naturalization, there was a process, I believe. I think it mostly just involved rejecting any allegiance you held to foreign princes and swearing yourself a member of the United States. Ta-da, you're done. Birthright citizenship is 14th Amendment. And even there's some complications involved because you still get to Native Americans. But at this point, immigrants, how they became citizens was to be established by Congress, because before then, I mean, theoretically, it was all just in the hands of any individual state. And this meant that there was a national naturalization policy.
And
going back again, go ahead.
No, you're talking about bankruptcies.
Yeah. To coin money, regulate the value thereof, and a foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. At the time, coin money was seen to mean literally just coins. And paper money was established by banks. And there's some real shenaniganery in the 19th century about bank currency.
Yeah, I don't think paper money, it was starting to be a thing, but wasn't officially a thing yet.
Yeah, paper money, the first paper money printed in the United States would be after this, I believe, and they were literally, they had greenbacks. That's why paper money is now called greenbacks. I actually have a friend who has a PhD in engraving of 19th century currency. So if you really want to know, I know someone who knows this stuff. I know a few details. I know that there was this enormous patchwork of paper currency, and you had to rely on your paper money being accepted by all of these different people because, you know, how could they know that they could trust your bank? And I know that Joseph Smith wanted to establish a bank because, let's be real, that's where the money was, and told people that he had a revelation from God that he should, but the state of Illinois disagreed. And so he altered the plates for his bank to say that it was an anti-bank safety society in the belief that the laws would not apply in that case. And yeah, he committed bank fraud. It's a fact.
Have you ever seen the extra credits thing about paper money?
I don't think I have, and I really ought. I like that channel.
Yeah, it's like, at first it was just the paper money was just, you can go toss it to one bank, and then go to another bank and say, the bank note says, "Hey, I had this much money in our bank. Give me your money now."
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a reason that the US took over printing paper currency when it became clear that coinage was just not going to cut it anymore. And there were some people who argued that, frankly, sovereign citizens today still argue, to my knowledge, that paper currency doesn't count as coining money.
Well, I think they tried to do that with the bringing back the dollar coins, but no one uses this. I don't think.
Yeah, I like dollar coins. I really want. I don't have a P.O. box, so nobody can send it to me unless they know my address. But what I really want is a Jimmy Carter dollar coin.
Oh, are they out already?
Yeah, well, they got through all the presidents. What I want is a set of the great ex-presidents. I have a John Quincy Adams. I want a Taft, and I want a Jimmy Carter.
So is there two of them? Because there's two mints.
Well, all U.S. currency is roughly the same, regardless of which mint it comes from.
I know, but for collectors' purposes.
Oh, for collectors, yeah. Yeah, I actually collected coins as a kid. My mom and grandmother got me into it a little bit after my dad died. They thought that I needed a hobby. The 80s were weird. Yeah, for a while there were actually 3 mints, but the San Francisco one is basically not operating anymore.
Yeah, I tried collecting all 100 state coins back when the thing, but but I the quarters, but somewhere along the lines I either lost interest or lost my book or did something.
Yeah, like I've got a quarter sitting here on my desk, and I can tell looking at it that it was minted in Denver because there is a little tiny D next to the bow in Washington's pigtail.
Now, also, I don't know at this point it was a thing, but I think before this, each state had their own bank and their own currency.
Yeah,
for a while.
Yeah, their own bank, their own currency, their own coinage, everything. Yeah, no, this was a really, really necessary part of the Constitution. Standardizing currency is one of those things that let us have a country.
Yeah, like, see, 5 Michigan dollars are worth 20 New York dollars, but only worth 1 Vermont dollar.
Yeah, and I mean, smaller states in a lot of that part of the country, but also traveling was harder. So most people didn't really need to know, if you lived in New Hampshire, what currency was in South Carolina probably didn't matter to you unless you were a merchant or a ship captain. So a standardized currency for the United States was vital. Likewise, weights and measures.
Which if we had forgotten the metric system back then,
Well, the metric system was invented, and the reason we didn't go on it at the time was because the French Revolution, which basically created the metric system, was really controversial, and for good reason, honestly. Like, the French aristocracy was awful, but the French Revolution also went way too far. It's not surprising that the guy who started going too far also ended up being beheaded in the French Revolution. Like, that's just, what are you going to do?
But looking back on it, I mean, we do it now a little bit, but still like, just add times 10, divide by 10.
Yeah. Metric makes a lot of sense. I am one of those people who says that metric makes sense, but I like Fahrenheit for the temperatures of human experience.
Yeah. It's hard. See, I think is it 36? Sarah, is it 36 for human temperature?
I have no idea what the human temperature in Celsius is. I don't know.
I just, yeah, neither do I. I just know 0 100.
Yeah.
Literally freezing. Or 32, 225, 220, 212.
212. And for scientific measures, and probably for baking, though I have a Fahrenheit oven, so I wouldn't know. But for scientific measures, Celsius all the way. For human experience, I just think Fahrenheit works better because the numbers are placed. Yeah, people can disagree. That's fine.
Let's not even get into Kelvin.
Yeah. Kelvin is great if you are a physicist or an astrophysicist, but people don't need to work in Kelvin. We don't use those scales. But the most of the founding fathers were of English descent, which means that we inherit, and of course the colonies had been English colonies, so we inherited the English measuring system, and American stubbornness has kept us using it far past when almost the entire rest of the world has moved on to metric.
Yeah, even though we just fought with England, we still traded with them.
Yeah, well, I mean, we spoke the same language. It was a lot easier to trade with the English than with the Spanish or the French or the Germans. And also, all of our ships were used to going there. All of our captains knew how to get there. It made sense that we kept trading with England. But if the French Revolution hadn't been so controversial, we could be on the metric system by now.
Yeah. I still think it's funny that, like, I think people made a joke before that even the English don't use the English system anymore.
No, they don't. They're all metric. Canadians are about 50-50 from what I can tell. There's a bunch of things where Canadians use English measurements, because I used to get Canadian TV. They mostly use the metric system, but and it may have been because the stations I was watching were border stations, but all the temperature would be in both.
Now, I don't know about I do remember in the 80s, maybe early 90s, before they changed all the signs, a lot of the highway signs, mile signs were both in standard and metric. There's like 55 miles per hour, and under it said blah 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 kilometers per hour.
I don't remember that in California. They may have done it, I just don't remember. It was part of this attempt to slowly ease the United States onto metric. I was definitely taught metric in school. Actually, my son is fairly annoyed that we don't use metric because it's so much easier, and I can't argue the point.
Yeah, have you ever seen I think I might have shared it on Dapper's Discord, but how all the different standards, like 2 pica is an inch and 4 bits are a pica, and
yeah. No, and I mean there are a lot of measurements that we don't actually use ourselves. We don't use drams or hogsheads or rods or there are a lot of archaic measurements. I can't remember the exact quote or else I would have used it by now, but Grandpa Simpson talks about how many rods his car gets to the hogshead, and that's the way he likes it. Which also proved that his car got terrible fuel efficiency, if I remember the quote correctly. But it would make more sense if we went on to metric. The government has tried. Americans are not interested.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep scrolling through slides until we hit a period. By the way,
real fast. I think 1 meter is like 3 inches longer than a yard, give or take.
Yeah. It's roughly 30 centimeters to the foot. Because I remember, in school we'd always have rulers that had centimeters on one side and inches on the other, and it was always 30 centimeters on a 1 foot yard.
Yeah,
a 1 foot.
About 2.5 per inch.
Yeah,
give or take. All right, let's go. Let's move on.
To provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States. which is actually what the Secret Service was formed for. The Secret Service had its initial job as dealing with counterfeiting, I believe, starting in the Civil War.
Before they decide to guard the president, too.
After we had a couple of presidents shot because nobody was guarding them, they thought, hey, maybe we should have people do that.
Let's have the money people do it.
But, yeah, counterfeiting money and guarding the president. That's what the Secret Service does. So, you know.
You don't think it's the same job, but
from counterfeiting money. Let's
like, sir. Okay, take you. Protect you in a second, sir. We gotta check this dollar bill here.
Right, exactly. It's weird, but if I ran the country, which again I shouldn't, but I couldn't do worse than a lot of the people currently doing it. One of the things I would do is reform the patchwork of police agencies we have in this country, because we don't need as many as we have. To establish post offices and post roads. And this is one that Eisenhower leaned on for the interstate highway system. Because at the founding of the country, the only roads that were really maintained were roads that the post traveled on. When we talk about the difficulty of travel of this era, one of the issues is the roads were terrible. You rode a horse because you couldn't get a wheeled conveyance along a lot of those roads.
Because most of them weren't paved.
Basically, none of them were paved outside of cities. They were rutted. They were full of holes. If they weren't used regularly enough, they would grow over. The trees would start to cover them. The road system for most of the country was in very bad shape.
Let's go back in time, kidnap some Roman engineers, and have them rebuild our roads for us.
You know, they wouldn't have known what to do about cars.
Well, yeah, I guess that's the situation there.
They do drainage better. There's a spot at the bottom of the hill I live on that gets an enormous puddle through 90% of the winter. But Roman roads were stone, and stone wears away, and you can't repave stone.
Well, why argue that we don't have to deal with cars in our own either? But
well, some of us kind of do. Some of us don't have a whole lot of option other than cars.
I think
we live in wet states and have bad knees.
I forget I heard this joke somewhere on the internet. I forget which website, which channel it was, but they're like, in Europe, they made the cars for the road, and then here in America, they made the road for the cars.
I mean, to be strictly fair, number one, a lot of the roads in Europe are centuries to millennia older than cars.
Yeah.
And I would say that Olympia, sure as heck, downtown Olympia wasn't made for cars. I've driven in downtown Olympia. The streets there were very clearly made for carriages. They are too narrow, and there's no parking, and people park anyway. To promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. This is copyright in the Patent Office.
Yeah.
Now, I think they both need reformed, but they are established by right of the Constitution.
Yeah. I love this first one. The progress of science.
The progress of science. Wouldn't that be nice? Science should go forward. And to be fair to the scientists are going forward, but you can't go forward in science without funding and support and
with creationist Congress people.
Yeah. We're supposed to be promoting the progress of science, not encouraging people to not get vaccinated and drink raw milk.
God.
Oh,
and
it's depressing.
and now we have two people in charge of the medical services, the anti-vaxxer and the Dr. Oz.
Yeah, Dr. Oz, who is worried about the um, people who are sick being in an industry instead of the healthcare industry. So, as a disabled person, I have feelings. So many feelings. But the government is supposed to be helping to promote the progress of science and, quote, useful arts.
What's that mean by useful arts?
Useful arts is the trades, really.
Okay.
Which goes to, I really think that we need a national accredited trade school system the way we have colleges. I think that is a really sensible thing to establish because not every job needs college, but a lot of jobs that don't need college do need proper training. And if we had an accredited system so you'd know that the plumbing you were being taught was proper plumbing, the auto repair, the electrician, what have you, was proper, and you could produce this certificate that says, yes, I know what I'm doing, that would be good for the country. And it's provided for by the Constitution, in my opinion, but nobody's doing that.
Right. And then
Just because I'm a college graduate doesn't mean I don't see the importance of trade schools.
and then
I shouldn't have gone to one, but
I went to one for I kind of went to one in my high school year, CTC career technology school, but I never followed through with my trade school thing because now I don't think a lot of people even have printing presses anymore.
yeah, and a lot of the trade schools that have existed have been diploma mills. They've been for profit. The system for trade schools is broken in this country right now, and Congress has the authority to fix it, and I wish they would.
Yeah, and technically, I didn't go there for the right reasons. I went there because I was getting bullied at my home school, and I had to get out of there.
Yeah, I've known people who've done that kind of thing. I knew someone who thought ITT Tech was a proper college. It's like, no, that's a for-profit diploma mill. So, yeah. So that's what this one's about. Disney took real advantage of this section for many, many years.
And that'd be the copywriting and the patents, right?
That was the copywriting, was what Disney was really... That's why copyright in the United States is as long as it is. I'm hoping we're going to ease back on that, but not as far as some people want to. We need copyright. Copyright is important, but it doesn't need to be as long as it is in this country.
Yeah, like I said, we just got Steamboat Willie out of the copyright.
Yeah, and we are currently working on things that were, I think it's in 95 years or something ridiculous like that, and it needs to be way shorter than that. And at least one of Walt Disney's granddaughters agrees with me on this. So, yeah.
All right.
To constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. Congress is responsible for making the lower courts, establishing lower courts.
Anything that's not supreme.
Anything that's not the Supreme Court, Congress establishes.
Okay.
To define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. People forget the real way piracy looked in those days. We actually went to war against pirates in the early years of the United States. The Marine Corps hymn, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Tripoli that was part of the Barbary Coast, and we were there fighting pirates.
That's in Northern Africa.
Yes. Libya, I believe. Halls of Montezuma would presumably be when we invaded Mexico in the 1840s. But it is up to Congress to define piracy and to punish it. Which is why the FBI comes knocking at your door if you download too many things. To declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, we'll get back to that, and make rules concerning captures on land and water. Congress declares war. The president has a ridiculous level of authority to send troops when it's not wartime. Thank you, LBJ. Complicated legacy that man had.
So, have we officially declared war on anyone since World War II?
Oh yes, yes.
Okay.
The Gulf War, the first Gulf War, was a declared war, and then there was the War on Terror, which is a stupid concept, but we officially declared war on terror.
Where's the Treaty on Terror?
Armistice on Terror Day should be a national holiday if we ever stop being terrified. So, letters of marque and reprisal. This is the difference between a pirate and a privateer. Congress officially has the power to send pirates. But because they would be established by the government, they would be privateers. Obviously, we do not do this.
That we know of, Nadine.
That we know of, yeah. But this is from the days when there wasn't a standing navy. A lot of the weirder military stuff in the Constitution is based on the idea, and the First Amendment when we get to that, but it's based on the idea that there is no standing military. Because standing militaries are expensive. You want to talk about cutting the U.S. budget, you need to start by looking at the military budget. Because a military is expensive, and we have a huge one. Most of the U.S. budget goes toward caring for our elderly and having a military. Those are the two biggest expenses on the U.S. budget. And in the latter half of the 18th century, countries basically didn't have standing militaries. You called up an army when you needed one.
Or they were mercenaries.
Right. The Hessians were Germans who the English paid to fight in the United States during the Revolutionary War. So Congress could hire some random guy who had a ship to be part of the U.S. military and attack ships belonging to enemy nations. Because that was cheaper than having a standing navy. And even when you had a standing army and a standing navy, it was usually very, very small. And you only called out the people as needed. And one of the issues that led to the Revolutionary War was that the British soldiers were horribly paid. And so they would get jobs to supplement their pay. And so they were taking our jobs, But it was true that every British soldier who took a job in Boston, in Philadelphia, in New York, was then sending a lot of their money home to their family, and it was screwing with the local economies. So there's a lot of reasons why the Founding Fathers were, by and large, suspicious of standing militaries, which is why Congress has the authority to send out pirates. They can also make rules concerning captures on land and water, which in practice these days is mostly by international treaty. So Congress doesn't do it alone. They agree with other countries, but Congress is the one who has the right for those treaties.
All right.
To raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. It's that fear of the standing army. It's the concern about tyranny again. They do not want Congress to have unlimited authority to control an army.
So every 2 years they got to renew. Every 2 years they got to make it.
The
Again.
army budget comes up at least every 2 years. In practice, pretty much budget is a yearly thing, but constitutionally speaking, you cannot have a budget for an army that is longer than 2 years. Which you'll note is a term of the House of Representatives. So again, in theory, you can vote out your representative and get change that way.
Because it's a money thing.
Right. Right. To provide and maintain a navy. Pretty straightforward, same basic thing. To make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces. So the president is commander-in-chief. The army and navy, the military is considered to be under the executive branch, but the rules are still established by Congress to keep the president from having his own personal military.
What's the thing they did in the feudalism age?
Exactly, yeah. The English Civil War was fought between the parliamentary army and the royalist army. So, again, not living memory, but not far from living memory.
Yeah, because I think like the king gave land to the dukes or earls, and the dukes or earls gave land to the counts and barons. Then feudalism is kind of a power pyramid scheme, and at the bottom you have serfs who have nothing, like those people on Facebook who say they own their own business, but in point of fact they have a Sensi dealership. But then the barons, whatever, had knights and peasants, and then then like the king's like, hey, Baron number 5, can I borrow your knights for battle? Like
really,
yes, or give me their knights, or I'm taking away your land.
A really entertaining novel. It's a doorstop. It's a massive book, but it is very entertaining. That gets a lot into how feudalism worked in practice. Is Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. It's set during the English anarchy period, and it's so good. And there's a made-for-TV adaptation that is, fine. It's got a great cast.
I'm gonna see I'm gonna check and see if it's on Audible.
It's very long. I will warn you of that. It's massive, but I have pretty much the whole series, and they're all great. He does one set every couple of 100 years. The most recent one is in the Industrial Revolution.
So anarchy, that was during Matilda and Stephen.
Yes. It's about the building of a cathedral during that era. And there's a cheat sheet at the back that tells you who's historical and who isn't.
Pillars of the Earth, you say?
Pillars of the Earth, yes.
I'll look that up. If we're done here, we can go on.
Yep. To provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. And this is what Lincoln depended on during the Civil War. He asked Congress to call up an army to suppress an insurrection. George Washington, while he was president, actually personally led a group against an insurrection because George Washington was going to George Washington. The War of 1812 was repelling an invasion. The War of 1812 was complicated, but whatever. It is the last time we fought a serious military force on our own soil.
Is it by Ken Follett?
Ken Follett.
Yep, it is on Audible.
Fabulous. It's a good book. I read it for a college contract on banned books in the 2000-2001 school year. And reread it every now and again.
Why was it banned?
There's a lot of violence because it's set during the anarchy. And there are a couple of graphic adult scenes, and a lot of the characters are Saxon and use certain Anglo-Saxon words for, among other things, bodily functions. And for some reason, there's not a lot of respect for the church in it, given what the English church of that era looked like and how few people in it were enormously religious.
Oh yeah. See, book 1 is 40 hours and 56 minutes.
Yeah, it's like 900 pages. It's massive. It's really good, but it's massive. So that's pretty much no anarchy on American soil was what this one was basically saying. To provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress, which in practice is why we now have like a state national guard and things like that. But in those days, there was not so much a U.S. Army as, if you look at the Civil War, one of the most famous units in the Civil War was the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. It was raised by the state of Massachusetts, not by the U.S. government.
Yeah, a lot of things were just state, like the Army of the Potomac, the Army of Northern Virginia. Well,
even within that, if you look at every individual unit within the Army of the Potomac and the Army of Virginia, it'll say what state the unit was from. Because these days you join the Army and there are people in your unit from all over the country. And that was not true during the Revolutionary, during the Civil War. I think that started changing around about World War I, but I could be wrong. I know Teddy Roosevelt formed his own unit during the Spanish-American War, so that was still a thing that people were doing. But these days, the only real remnant of the states are in charge is the National Guards. To exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such a district not exceeding 10 miles square, as may, by cession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of the government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state, in which the same shall be for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. This means, and I hope like anything this is in blue someday, but this means Congress is in charge of Washington, D.C. And don't mind it not being in blue, Congress is also in charge of military bases.
Mm-hmm.
The reason the attack on Fort Sumter was seen as important was that Fort Sumter was not owned by South Carolina. Fort Sumter was owned by the United States government, and by taking it, that was an official act of insurrection.
Well, technically, all the forts in the South were owned by the United States government.
All of the states, yeah. It was just the government did choose to make Fort Sumter the model Fort Sumter was the example, but all of the forts in the southern United States were owned by Congress.
This was just, I guess, the first one that was outside the state borders. I guess.
Well, there were other forts and arsenals and things that were being invaded by state forces leading up to Fort Sumter. Ashton Shea in his Checkmate Lincolnites series talks a lot about that.
Oh yeah, the I think it's what the Northern Aggression episode. I think
the Northern Aggression episode talks a lot about that.
Like the Northern was very aggressive. Like after the South did like 20 different things.
Yeah, no. And I studied this in college too. I did a course on the U.S. South, and I studied a fair amount about the Civil War for some reason. It's like it's a pivotal moment in American history or something.
God.
But yeah, the South was seizing forts and arsenals and things all over the country at this point. And Fort Sumter was just, for reasons that mostly make sense, a good example of, no, this is where we stand our ground.
Don't get me started about Ohio again.
Oh boy.
It surprisingly has a lot of Confederate sympathizers in Ohio.
No, I know. There's some in Washington too, and it just people need to learn history.
Well, I can understand some southern states doing that maybe, but this was a northern state.
Yeah, no, I think I have ancestors who fought in the Civil War from Ohio. So, somewhere north anyway. I also have southern ancestors, but I have northern veterans in my line. So, yeah. Hey, there's the period.
Yay.
It's only been an hour. We're fine. We're good. To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department or officer thereof. Congress is in charge. If it's a law, Congress sets it. And yet, specifically things like the postal service and the military and letters of marque and reprisal and whatever. But broadly speaking, if it's needed to run the country, Congress sets the law.
At the time, I forget how now the 535 members of Congress.
Yeah.
Do this. Yeah. Back then, a little bit, 26 plus whatever the representatives were.
Yeah, and we covered that, but it was a while back.
Yeah.
I
guess that's the thing. Sorry, I guess that's the thing about all that power is in the power of multiple individuals, not just one person.
Yeah. And you have to get the vote, and the president has the authority, and laws change. There are laws on the books now that are overriding laws that were passed before. Or you can just, and we don't always do this, a lot of the time we just stop enforcing things, but you can just abolish a law, say this is no longer the law.
Like the Jim Crow laws.
Yeah. The Jim Crow laws, I believe, were mostly struck down by the Supreme Court. But you hear all these laws that are on the books at various places, and some of them are still on the books, and just nobody cares anymore. But a lot of them have been struck down, but they still make it to lists of stupid laws because they existed in the first place.
The stupid law in each of the 50 states thing.
Yeah.
Like you can't hunt a whale in your car. Something like that.
I believe Sasquatch hunting is illegal in Washington, which was clearly passed as a joke.
But if someone ever actually kills one, they'll get arrested.
Yes. But we couldn't make Louie Louie our official state song. Yeah. There are weird laws out there. It's just most of the weird laws people cite are either they make sense in context or else they haven't been on the books for a really long time.